Today on the Matt Walsh Show, while Americans drowned in their own homes from Hurricane Helene, the vice president was busy chatting about tampons and abortion on a sex podcast. If her priorities weren't clear to you already, well, they should be now. Also, Donald Trump returns to the scene of his first assassination attempt. The Department of Agriculture spends thousands of dollars on a program designed to make nature more inclusive to LGBT people, whatever that means. And today during the Daily Cancellation, I'll do something I've never done before. I'm going to, in a totally sincere and heartfelt way, defend Kamala Harris. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. Today is your final chance to join Daily Wire Plus at 47% off. Use code FIGHT at dailywire.com/subscribe before midnight. Join us as we fight the left and build the future. That's dailywire.com/subscribe, code FIGHT for 47% off new Daily Wire Plus memberships. Grand Canyon University, a private Christian university in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, believes that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. GCU believes in equal opportunity and that the American dream starts with purpose. GCU equips you to serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. By honoring your career calling, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. Change the world for good by putting others before yourself to glorify God. Whether your pursuit involves a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree, GCU's online, on-campus, and hybrid learning environments are designed to help you achieve your unique academic, personal, and professional goals. With 350 academic programs as of June 2024, GCU meets you where you are and provides a path to help you fulfill your dreams. The pursuit to serve others is yours. Let it flourish. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University, private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu. 6 days ago, as cadaver dogs were discovering dozens of dead bodies in destroyed communities across the Southeast in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, and as hundreds of thousands of people went without essentials like food and water and power, Kamala Harris wasn't overseeing any of those disaster relief efforts. She wasn't holding round-the-clock meetings at FEMA headquarters or the White House Situation Room. Instead, as American citizens drowned in their own homes, Kamala Harris was busy taping an episode of the popular sex and relationship podcast Call Her Daddy, which is hosted by a 30-year-old woman named Alex Cooper. Now, we've said a lot about the administration's indifference and callousness to the communities devastated by this storm. Every day there's a glaring new sign of just how little they care about American citizens who are dying. Just this weekend, for example, the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who oversees FEMA, was spotted shopping in Georgetown for high-end menswear. This was right after he announced that FEMA's out of money, which is something that he assured us wouldn't happen as recently as this summer. And meanwhile, on Saturday, whoever is running Kamala Harris's social media accounts announced that we're going to spend $150 million on providing food and shelter and humanitarian assistance, but it's not going to Americans in states like North Carolina or Tennessee. Instead, the money's going to Lebanon, a country full of people who hate us. So it's safe to say that when it comes to displaying incredible levels of callousness and incompetence and worse during a crisis, this administration has been working overtime. But with this interview on the Call Her Daddy podcast, Kamala has demonstrated that however low the bar is with this administration, it can always get lower. And first of all, before I get into the specifics of this interview and what an unmitigated disaster it was in so many ways, we should acknowledge we could see the political reasoning behind it, even if I don't think that it will have the effect ultimately the campaign intended. But this is part of a strategic shift in the Kamala campaign, as David Axelrod pointed out the other day. This week, probably because her internal poll numbers look really bad, worse than we even realize, Kamala's going to be appearing on a bunch of friendly shows with left-wing hosts, entertainment-style shows. Stephen Colbert, Howard Stern are two of them. But very few personalities have the reach of Alex Cooper. It's an extremely popular podcast with young women. We talked about it during Daily Cancellation a few weeks ago. And that's why Cooper just signed a contract worth $125 million. But that fact by itself says something very troubling about young women in this country. And I think that's also a conversation that we should have, because we're always talking about men and how troubled we are by young men and what's happening with young men. But for all the grief that we give men about the kinds of role models they choose, manosphere influencers, etc., all the porn they watch, and all of that, there should be just as much scrutiny on the young women who have made bimbos like Alex Cooper into huge stars. And that's what Alex Cooper is. She's a degenerate fourth-wave feminist who hid her engagement with her now husband from her own audience so that she could continue selling them on a lifestyle of self-destructive, empty, sex-crazed nihilism, which naturally entails raising their all-important, quote-unquote, body count. This is a podcast that teaches women to wield sex like a weapon and to sacrifice their dignity in the process. Now, in that sense, at least, Kamala actually makes perfect sense as a guest. There's a very strong argument to be made that her body count back in California is the reason she's now the Democrats' nominee for president. So she's the perfect fit for a podcast that just 2 episodes ago, before the sitting vice president appeared, did an hour-long episode on the topics of, quote, hall passes and frat daddies. So here's a couple of excerpts from that episode, or at least the parts of it we can air, which we can't air most of it, but here's just a little bit of that.
My mom, as like a gift, sent me the Jersey Pottery Barn teen sheets, and I was like in flames when I woke up. I thought I had the flu.
So I remember I got like these dark gray ones, and the first time a guy my sheets, and I only had, again, one pair, so I was just looking at that like, damn, and I just left
like
it there.
A credit card later on after the had dried and you were like trying to scrape it off. You were like, we'll just get that off at the end.
Something that you talk about in your stand-up special that had me cackling. Well, 2 things. We have to talk about 2 things. One is because...
love him and hate him.
Sweetie.
Mm-hmm.
The way that you described heading downtown to the... And seeing the... And approaching it.
There is a goofy...
It is.
Yeah.
But it works if you like swirl your tongue in there a little. Like,
oh, yeah.
Oh, it's a little... Like,
if you don't get in that... they're not getting in yours. And we all know this.
Give them a little surprise attack.
But I never try and go for the other...
So did you catch that? I mean, we had to bleep like half of it. So, I mean, I think it's enough for you to basically get the idea. And this, again, is 2 episodes ago. Right before the vice president of the United States is sitting down for a conversation. And what you just heard there is actually pretty tame by the standards of this podcast. They have another episode called Welcome to Slut Camp. And I mean, you can imagine what slut camp entails. I can't play any of that, but there's no need to. And to be clear about the context here, this is the second most popular podcast in the world after Joe Rogan. It's by far the top podcast among young women, but they're not talking about interesting or intellectual topics like Joe Rogan does. Okay, you're probably not going to go on, you're not going to tune into the Alex Cooper Call Her Daddy show to hear, to hear from, an Amazon explorer or someone debating the moon landing, like you will with Joe Rogan, which are at least interesting topics. Instead, you get this inane, just absurdly vulgar, lobotomized nonsense. And it's a show aimed at turning young women into very stupid and depraved hedonists. An emphasis on very stupid, which is why every second you spend listening to this filth causes your IQ to depreciate exponentially. Just preparing for the show, as I watched some of these clips, including the ones we're about to play with Kamala in them, I could feel my brain cells melting away like candle wax, and which is why, I mean, not to spend too long on this point, but this is a good thing for any young men out there if you're in the dating world and you happen to find yourself dating a young woman who is a professed fan of this podcast. Just turn and walk away. Don't even bother. Just you could break up over text message. This is not a woman who's even worth talking to, honestly. Any woman who enjoys sitting and listening to this podcast is not high enough quality if you're a young man. I mean, that's really how bad it is. And we have no problem talking this way about men who enjoy media of a similar type, but on the other end of the spectrum. We have no problem saying that about them. So it should be equal for the other side of the equation. And that brings up the question of why any presidential candidate, even one as dumb and immoral as Kamala, would want to appear on this podcast. I mean, normally when you're running a presidential campaign, you give interviews to a wide array of outlets. You don't limit yourself to vapid influencers who make a living talking to celebrities about oral sex. So why is Kamala doing that exactly? As it happens, Alex Cooper asked Kamala Harris that very question, and Cooper got this word salad in response. Listen.
I'm curious, you don't do too many long form interviews. What made you want to do Call Her Daddy today?
Well, I think you and your listeners have really got this thing right, which is one of the best ways to communicate with people is to be real, and to talk about the things that people really care about. I mean, what I love about what you do is that your voice in your show is really about your listeners. And I think especially now, this is a moment in the country and in life where people really want to know they're seen and heard and that they're part of a community, that they're not out there alone. And so I'm really glad to be with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time.
You've got this thing, right? Says the Democrats' nominee for president of the United States. She says this podcast is real because they talk about things people care about, like hall passes and frat daddies. Still not sure what a frat daddy is, by the way, and I don't really care to know. In other words, according to Kamala, Americans don't care about inflation or drowning in their own homes after a hurricane or the possibility of World War III breaking out in the Middle East. They care about listening to bimbos talking about sex. And to that end, most of the conversation on this podcast involving two childless women was about abortion, of course. Kamala Harris repeated the familiar lie that Georgia's heartbeat law somehow killed a woman, when in fact the abortion pill killed that woman. Kamala also lied about Tim Walz's support for allowing children to die after they survive abortions, even though it's well documented that children are in fact being left to die in hospitals in Minnesota. And listening to all of this, it's clear that the campaign sees abortion, of course, as the single most important issue in this election. And it's not hard to see why they think that. Abortion destroys families, which are the greatest obstacle to increased government power. People with families are loyal to their families, not to imbeciles in the federal government like Kamala. The other obvious benefit of talking about abortion in the context of this podcast is that it's a safe topic for Kamala. Kamala doesn't really have to think on her feet very much. She can use the canned talking points that she's memorized, and she knows that her audience will be receptive to them. So here's just one of those moments where Kamala Harris called back to a line that she used during the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, and here it is again. Listen.
I want to pose this question more to you and the Daddy Gang, but one of the biggest conversations in this year's election revolves around a woman's body.
Yep.
I want to take a moment, and can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power to make a decision
I know what you're going to ask.
about a man's body. Let's
No.
Is there any law?
No. No. Look, we are a work in progress. But here's one of the many things I so love about our country. Part of the strength of our country and our evolution as a country has been through the fight for the expansion of rights. Not the restriction of rights, but the expansion of rights. And we still have work to do. But I say that work is born out of love of country. And it's hard work, but it's good work, and it's important work. And that's what's before each of us. And I think that, around election time, but every day, back to the conversation that we've been having about power, the beauty of a democracy is that we each as individuals have the power to weigh in on this.
Yeah, we want to expand rights. We want to expand rights by entirely removing all human rights from a whole entire subset of the human species, which are unborn children. That's how we expand rights. But what we heard at the beginning there is this very familiar line that there are no laws that apply to male bodies, apparently. This is a line that the Kamala campaign is obviously very fond of, which is concerning because there are about a dozen reasons why it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. First of all, we do have laws that apply exclusively to male bodies. The biggest one is the Selective Service Act, which requires the overwhelming majority of men to sign up for the draft. The law literally refers to male persons, not women. It says male persons in the law. And that's not a small thing, since it's led to the deaths of a lot of men. In Vietnam alone, something like 11,000 men were drafted into service. And then on top of that, we have divorce laws, which are extraordinarily biased towards women and against men in various ways. So just as a basic factual matter, the talking point is just wrong. And there's an even more fundamental point to make, which is that all laws, by definition, control the bodies of all human beings who are subject to them. Okay? I mean, this might be too philosophical of a point for these two ladies to grasp, but every law, any law that exists, controls the bodies of everybody who is under that law. So, a law against stealing, for example, is a law that controls your body, controls my body. Because of that law, I'm not allowed to use my arms to draw a gun inside of a bank. I can't use my mouth to scream, "Give me all your money." I can't use my legs to run away with a bag of cash. That's a law that controls my body. It tells me something I'm not allowed to do with my body. In fact, literally every law that exists in this country tells me what I am and am not allowed to do with my body. That's every law. So using the terminology of pro-abortion activists, my body is being controlled in these scenarios. So if we're going to get rid of abortion bans because they control women's bodies, then we need to get rid of every other law on the books, because all of them are intruding on your freedom to do whatever you want with your own body, which, as we learned during COVID, of course, isn't something that any of these people actually care about anyway. But even within the fantasy realm that left-wing activists have constructed for themselves, the talking point still doesn't make any sense. I mean, these are the same people who have told us for years that men can get pregnant. Men and women are not distinct categories in their worldview. That's supposedly the official consensus position of every Democrat and all of their, the discredited scientific journals that they like to refer to. So under that view, abortion laws would in fact apply to men, specifically quote unquote trans men, who we're told are no different from normal men. What happened to that? Did Alice Cooper and Kamala Harris just forget all about the existence of quote-unquote trans men? Is this trans erasure? Is this trans genocide that they're conducting right now? Or are they finally acknowledging that men can't get pregnant, even if these two are too dumb to realize what they just said? Sure seems like it. So where's the human rights campaign? Where are the trans activists screeching on social media informing us that Kamala Harris just genocided millions of trans men by denying their lived experience? They're all silent, strangely enough, and we know why. They all know that men can't actually get pregnant, and that this is a category that doesn't actually exist at all. And it's all an obvious lie that's maintained by activist organizations that are really just front groups for the Democrat Party. And the thing about lies is that sometimes they're hard to keep straight. Sometimes you slip up, and that's what Kamala Harris and Alex Cooper just did. And that's not even the biggest problem with the talking point, which is that abortion laws do not, in fact, control a woman's body. They control what she is allowed to do to someone else's body. Laws that permit abortion, in fact, give women absolute power over the bodies of their children, to include their male children. And that means that pro-abortion laws are, in fact, laws that govern what can be done to the male body. But like all dumb narcissists, Alex Cooper and Kamala Harris never pause to consider the substance of what they're actually saying. It never occurs to them that their talking points could be wrong, so they just repeat them over and over again. And while they do it, they make sure to point out how enlightened they are and how dumb men are by comparison. Here's just one of those moments. Listen.
To put it in our TikTok terms, I have seen girls on the street walk up to men and be like, do you know where a tampon goes? Do you know how many tampons we use? Do you even know how, do you know what a X or Y or Z is of a part of our, and they don't know the answer.
I was the first vice president or president to ever in office go to a reproductive health care clinic, ever.
In retrospect, there's one way that this podcast could have been at least somewhat entertaining, but they can't do it with Kamala Harris as the guest. That was the mistake. The guest could have been Tim Walz. That would have been worth watching. He could have talked all about his law requiring that high schools, stock the boys' bathrooms with tampons. He could have gone into great detail about how much he knows about tampons and how teenage boys can benefit from them and where exactly they're supposed to put the tampons. But none of that happened, unfortunately. So we're stuck with Alice Cooper and Kamala Harris saying that men are idiots because they apparently provide unsatisfactory answers when women randomly stop them in the street and ask, do you know how many tampons we use? First off, if a random woman asks you that question on the street, they are obviously the weird ones in that interaction. That's a situation where you should, keep on walking and not make eye contact unless it's absolutely necessary. And by the way, if you're one of these women apparently stopping men on the street to ask that question and they're not answering and they're walking away, it could be they don't know the answer. It could also be that they don't want to talk about this, you freak. And also, by the way, just so you know, why should any man know how many tampons you use? Why would you want them to know that? No, that's not information anyone should know, because you should keep that to yourself. Okay, you shouldn't be talking about that publicly. That's disgusting. And also, if the standard is that people should be educated about topics that don't directly apply to them, or else they're morons, then I have some very bad news for Alex Cooper and Kamala Harris, because both of them are complete morons by that standard, or by any other standard. Kamala Harris doesn't even understand the economic policies that she's proposing, even though she's had several months to figure it out. And that became clear in the span of this 45-minute friendly podcast interview. Here's just one example. Listen.
Which is why another thing that I'm really focused on is small businesses and startups, and giving startups a $50,000 tax deduction, because right now it's $5,000 and you can't start up any small business with $5,000.
Now, from the sound of it, Kamala Harris thinks that a tax deduction is like an investment in the business, a check that gets cut, like seed money. She says no one can start a business with $5,000, so she'll give businesses $50,000 instead. But that's not what a tax deduction is. A tax deduction reduces the amount of income that businesses pay taxes on. Nobody's expecting anyone to start a business with the $5,000 tax deduction. The point of the deduction is to help businesses once they've brought some income in. So Kamala's plan would allow businesses to pay less tax if they're generating more than $5,000 in income. That's the plan. Unfortunately, Kamala is incapable of explaining this in plain English or even understanding what her own plan is. Instead, she's repeated this exact talking point in every recent interview she's done, starting with Oprah. Every single time she says that no one can start a business with $5,000. She uses that exact formulation verbatim, and at no point does she demonstrate any understanding of what a tax deduction actually is, even the specific tax deduction that she is proposing. And none of the interviewers ever ask her about it because they probably don't know what a tax deduction is either. I don't think that Alice Cooper was probably capable of going back and forth in any about tax policy. So she probably can't even spell deduction. But anyway, that doesn't matter because they do know what tampons are. And apparently that's supposed to be extremely impressive. People whose homes were just destroyed in North Carolina are supposed to watch interviews like this and elevate Kamala Harris to the presidency. People who can't afford groceries are supposed to feel seen and reassured by the promise that as bad as things get, they can take solace in the fact that Kamala Harris and her running mate are both tampon experts. That's the message of joy and empowerment that Democrats are now pushing. They're courting audiences that listen to Call Her Daddy and Howard Stern. They're betting that this is the level of discourse or lack thereof that most female voters are capable of. It's an entirely degrading way of thinking about your own voters. And as you can tell very clearly from Kamala Harris's appearance on this podcast, it's a way of thinking that dulls the mind. People who only think about themselves aren't capable of having interesting conversations. They're not capable of coming up with ideas that help anyone else. They're not even capable of feigning empathy as hundreds of Americans die in the wake of one of the worst hurricanes in American history. They're only capable of seeking out new ways to empower themselves. The more depraved and grotesque, the better. That's what Kamala Harris has done throughout her entire political career. It's a big part of why she's hated, even in her own home state of California. She preaches empowerment as a transparent way of empowering one person, herself. And now, with less than a month to go until Election Day, maybe out of desperation, or maybe because she truly can't help herself at this point, Kamala Harris has finally stopped pretending otherwise. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Folks, let me tell you about something that's got the DC swamp absolutely terrified. It's called Kalshi, and it's the first legal prediction market in the U.S. Now, why should you care? Because for the first time in a century, you can actually put your money where your mouth is when it comes to elections. That's right. The last time Americans could legally bet on elections was back in 1924. The elites have been keeping this power to themselves, but Kalshi just blew the doors wide open. They got approval from the feds to offer what they call event contracts. Basically, you can take positions on whether future events will happen or not. Now, I know what you're thinking, Matt, isn't this just gambling? Well, no, it's not. This is about using your knowledge to make money and hedge against risks. Plus, these markets are scary accurate at predicting outcomes, way more reliable than those rigged polls the mainstream media loves to trot out. But here's the kicker. Kalshi isn't just for elections. You can trade on everything from economic indicators to climate change predictions. It's like a crystal ball, except it's powered by the free market instead of some bureaucrat's fever dream. So whether you want to profit from your political insights or just stick it to the establishment by participating in the most accurate election forecast out there, Kalshi is your answer. Here's the deal. Sign up today at kalshi.com/Walsh. That's KALSHI.com/Walsh. And when you deposit $100, they'll give you an extra $20 to trade with. That's right. They're basically paying you to join the prediction revolution. Let me spell it out one more time. KALSHI.com/Walsh. Deposit $100, receive $20 free to trade. It's that simple. Don't wait. Head to kalshi.com/Walsh today. Here's the first piece of news that I want to mention briefly, news in my life and here at the Daily Wire. This past weekend, my film, Am I Racist?, officially became the highest grossing documentary in the U.S. this decade. So through the first 5 years of this decade, we have almost through the first 5 years of 2020 to almost 2025, we have made more at the box office than any other film in our genre. And we also, on another note, we surpassed over the weekend Super Size Me at the domestic box office. Super Size Me, of course, didn't come out this decade, but is one of the most iconic and famous documentaries of all time, for better or worse. And we surpassed its domestic total. So all in all, some major achievements here, and extremely grateful to everyone who came out and supported the film. It's a huge relief, along with many other things. It's a huge relief, I'll say that. Because as we've talked about, as I've mentioned on the show, the fact is that most documentaries just absolutely die at the box office. They make like, 40 grand or whatever, and then they fade away. Most movies in general don't perform, documentaries in particular, because documentaries typically are not considered to be kind of theatrical experiences. So in a way, you might think that because I've said that before, and we've also talked about the risk involved in putting into the theaters. But you might think that actually it's kind of a no-risk proposition because documentaries aren't supposed to make any money. They're not supposed to perform. Most of them don't. And one that's made by a conservative news company that's never put anything in theaters before, well, that's all the more reason why, by all rights, it shouldn't perform. And so if ours flopped, it would only be doing exactly what you would expect to do and what most any other film in the same situation would do and has done. So you might think that. But we knew that, we would not be given that kind of grace. There'd be a lot of people lined up to point to our failure and hang it around our necks. There wouldn't be a lot of people saying, hey, it's a documentary, and real hard for those to succeed. It's their first try. Don't give them a hard time, guys. That wouldn't happen. Very few people would be saying that. Instead, they'd be pointing at me and calling me a one-hit wonder and celebrating the failure. And it would have been hugely embarrassing, probably devastating to my career personally and to the Daily Wire's brand. So you worry about that before you put the movie out, on top of the deep anxiety that anyone who's ever made anything creative just feels in general. You know, you always worry that before you put something out into the world that people won't get it, they won't like it, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, not trying to turn this into a therapy session. You know how I feel about therapy. The point is simply that even though things turned out extremely well, they didn't have to turn out that way. And there is a very substantial risk involved, not guaranteed. We needed you guys to go watch the movie and get it, what we're doing, and appreciate it, and then go tell your friends about it. We needed all those things to happen in order for this gamble to pay off. And you did do all those things. So we thank you for that. And in many ways with this film, we're just getting started. It's only been out in the world for a few weeks. So very thrilled by how it's all turned out so far. Donald Trump spoke in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday. This is, of course, the site of the assassination attempt, the first one anyway. We now have to qualify those kinds of statements. So, the site of his first assassination attempt. Elon Musk also spoke in support of Trump, and I'll play a brief snippet of his remarks. Here they are.
You know, the true test of someone's character is how they behave under fire. And we had one president who couldn't climb a flight of stairs, and another who was fist pumping after getting shot. Fight, fight, fight! Blood coming down the face. Now, America is the home of the brave. And there's no truer test than courage under fire. So who do you want representing America? Yeah, absolutely. And I think this election, I think it's the most important election of our lifetime. This is no ordinary election. The other side wants to take away your freedom of speech. They want to take away your right to bear arms. They want to take away your right to vote effectively. You got 14 states now that don't require voter ID. California, where I used to live, is just passed a law banning voter ID for voting.
So it's huge that he was there, and it's really difficult to overstate the significance of this. To have Elon Musk speaking at a Trump rally. And the real significance of a moment like this, it's not just that Elon is obviously hugely influential and may sway some people to vote for Trump, and that's all true, but the bigger kind of service that Elon is providing here is that he's giving cover to other prominent people to come out and support Trump. And so I would expect over the next few weeks to see more of that, because once you have Elon Musk, the richest man in the world and one of the most famous men in the world, once you have him giving us, I mean, not just saying that he likes Trump, but actually giving a stump speech at a Trump rally, now it's not so scary. It's not so scary anymore if you're also someone of prominence, especially mainstream prominence. It's a little bit less scary for you now to come out and support Trump. It feels a little bit less subversive and forbidden because Elon Musk has done it. Now, of course, Elon Musk has done it and is, for this and many other reasons, is still excoriated by the media. We know all that. But even so, it provides a significant amount of cover. And I'm always impressed. The fact that Elon is willing to, you could look at this in a cynical way, and you could say that, well, yeah, he's the richest man in the world. He's got nothing to, they can't touch him. He's got nothing to lose. It doesn't take any courage for him to come out and do the things that he's done. But I don't see it that way. I see it very similar to, it's the same thing as I've said about J.K. Rowling. For all my issues I have with her ideologically, at least on the trans issue, yeah, she's a billionaire, but that's exactly why, and so you could say she's more equipped to deal with the backlash than other people are, and that's true. But also, you know, when you've got that kind of money, you could just as easily, and most people with that kind of money do say, hey, I don't need this. Like, why would I go out and put my reputation on the line, deal with all the backlash? I don't need to do that. Why would I do that? That's what most people in those positions say. So to have all that and say, you know what, I'm going to go dive into the middle of this thing and I'm going to invite the enormous headache that's going to come with it. I'm going to go from being rich and famous and generally beloved and everything is going great and everyone loves me and everything's awesome. And I'm going to make my life a lot more complicated right now. I think that most people in that position are not willing to do that. So it's a huge credit to J.K. Rowling and Elon Musk that they're willing to. On top of everything else Elon Musk has going on, so also speaking of Elon, the Post-Millennial has this report from a few days ago. In a post on his X platform Sunday, Elon Musk announced plans to launch unmanned Mars missions within 2 years and crewed missions within 4 years. This endeavor, which he says is primarily to be funded using revenue from his Starlink satellite internet company, is a response to what he sees as the fundamental existential question of whether or not humanity becomes sustainably multiplanetary before something happens on Earth to prevent that. In a post tackling philosophical as well as technological questions, Musk posed the idea that the survival of humanity itself depends on being able to get to, colonize, and thrive on other worlds. He wrote, quote, SpaceX plans to launch about 5 uncrewed Starships to Mars in 2 years. If those all land safely, then crewed missions are possible in 4 years. If we encounter challenges, then the crewed missions will be postponed another 2 years. It's only possible to travel from Earth to Mars every 2 years when the planets are aligned. This increases the difficulty of the task, but also serves to immunize Mars from many catastrophic events on Earth. No matter what happens with landing success, SpaceX will increase the number of spaceships traveling to Mars exponentially with every transit opportunity. So this is one of the many challenges with going to Mars. The shortest distance between Earth and Mars is about 30 million miles. And so if you were sending a mission to Mars, it would need to be in that window. The longest distance is like 200 million miles, 230 million miles. So obviously you can't go then. You have to go during the short window. And if you go during the short window, it still takes about 6 months to get there, which is an extraordinary amount of time when you think about it. Especially for us these days, like in a kind of odd way, traveling to Mars, in a weird way, it's like, it seems more daunting to us today than it would if you just arrived to this time period in a time machine from the year 1820. And what I mean is that for the majority of human history, the idea of traveling to a certain location for months and months, the concept of measuring travel time in months or years wasn't so foreign. You know, that was normal. And obviously they didn't have the technology to go to space back then, but the time involved, like the time alone, was not unusual. And these days, travel is usually measured in minutes or hours. A long trip is one that you measure in a few hours by our standards today. At the most, you might measure it in days, a few days at the absolute most. Like if I were to leave where I am right now and go to the farthest possible place on Earth from my current location, it would take what, like a day, maybe 2 days to get there? So when you think about traveling for months and months at a time to one destination, it's just mind-boggling, and that just doesn't exist. That doesn't exist in the human species anymore, that kind of travel length, at least not in the modern world. And of course, the travel time isn't the greatest obstacle. You know, there are many other obstacles as well, which is why it's a very good thing that we have a multi-billionaire who cares about stuff like this. We certainly can't rely on the government to do it anymore. And it'll forever blow my mind that space travel is not a relevant political issue, like at all. I mean, presidents and presidential candidates never talk about it. Like, it doesn't come up. We haven't heard it in a debate. It just doesn't come up. It's not even, it's apparently not a topic of interest at all. Politically, which I think is pretty sad. All right, Daily Wire has this. The Department of Agriculture is set to pay $50,000 to encourage children and young adults who identify as transgender, lesbian, gay, or bisexual to go on wilderness conservation trips in the Pacific Northwest. So the government's not worried about, going to Mars, but they are worried about getting more trans and gay people into the forests in Oregon. So we got our priorities straight here. The grant, which started in 2022 and runs through 2026, was awarded to the Northwest Youth Corps, a conservation organization based in Eugene, Oregon, that works to diversify the outdoors. The grant funds lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer inclusion and sound to summit crews in an apparent reference to two different programs. The Northwest Youth Corps explained how it intends to diversify the outdoors, adding that a key element in our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is fielding single identity affinity crews and internships to support communities historically underserved in the outdoor space. This is one of the most bizarre, probably the most bizarre iteration of the DEI agenda. This idea that we have to make the outdoors, we have to make nature more inclusive of approved victim groups. I mean, listen to the wording here. Communities historically underserved in the outdoor space. What the hell does that mean? Underserved by the outdoors? What do you mean there's no better example of the overwhelming narcissism of left-wing identity politics than this. Imagine going outside, going out into the woods, and then feeling somehow victimized because you aren't being served. You aren't being included. Who the hell is supposed to be serving you? The trees? The rocks? Do you want woodland creatures to emerge from the forest and start singing you a song? Like, what do you want? What are you, Snow White? Pocahontas? Is that how you think this works? You're standing out in the forest looking around. I feel so underserved right now. This is how these people see the world. They really see the world this way. This is how they see it. They see nature itself as a thing that exists to serve them, that they are entitled to be served and included when they walk out into the wilderness. Nature is obligated, duty-bound to include and welcome and serve them. This it explains so much about left-wing thinking. And it also explains, as I've argued many times, it explains the incredible arrogance behind left-wing environmentalism and climate alarmism. This arrogance that masquerades as humility, as concern for nature, as even a kind of worshiping of nature. I think this is something that the conservatives often get wrong, by the way. They talk about environmentalists and say that they're nature worshipers. They're actually not. That, in fact, would be really an improvement over what is really happening. Not that we want people to be nature-worshiping pagans, but it turns out that there are worse things than that. The worst thing is to be what these people are, which is worshipers of the self. Like, they couldn't bring themselves to actually worship nature because that would require too much humility. It would require kind of a sense of awe at the grandeur of nature, which is really what led primitive pagan cultures historically, and even primitive pagan cultures today. It's what led them to become pagan. It's why they worship nature, because they looked around at all of these amazing things happening, and the sun in the sky, and these giant trees that are growing, and they saw all these things, and the wind blowing, and these things that they can't control, that are outside of their control, and they recognize these things as immense and powerful. And because they did not have the fullness of truth, and they didn't have the Christian faith, that led them to worship these things that God has made rather than to worship God himself. Again, not what we would recommend for people today, but my point again is that these leftists, these environmentalists are doing something worse than that they are actually worshiping themselves. And they believe that they have power over nature, that human beings create the weather and have the power to change it just by passing laws and regulations. They have this incredibly outsized view of their own importance and their own power on a cosmic scale. This is what separates the self-proclaimed liberal environmentalist and supposed nature lover, the kind of liberal who would even put nature lover on their, whatever their dating profile, they say, I'm a nature lover, I love going for hikes. It's like, yeah, first of all, you've never been on a hike, actually. You went for a walk in the woods for 30 minutes, okay? That's not a hike. And it separates them from the conservative who actually loves nature, but doesn't go around declaring it, and certainly wouldn't call themselves an environmentalist. The difference is that the conservative who loves nature, and I'm one of them, by the way, we love it because we appreciate it for what it is. We have a healthy respect for it. We don't idolize it. We don't put it on a pedestal, but we also don't try to put ourselves on a pedestal in relation to it. We understand that nature is beautiful and majestic and awe-inspiring, but also brutal and terrifying and utterly indifferent to us and our wants and needs and desires. That's the difference. God is not indifferent to us, but nature itself, when you're walking around the woods, like the woods are indifferent to you. They don't care. The sun is indifferent to you. It doesn't care. And this is what they don't understand. I'm very certain that I spend more time in nature, quote unquote, than the vast majority of liberals who call themselves environmentalists. I love nothing more than go out on a lake, spend all day there, surrounded by water and trees and, listening to the sounds of the bugs and the birds and the loons on the water. We're raising our children the same way. My son has a whole campsite set up on our property where he spends hours there each day practicing with his bow and cutting firewood and working on a shelter and all that stuff. And yet, I'm not raising him to be an environmentalist, and I'm not one of those either. I'm not going to identify myself that way. But I have as many conservatives do, a healthy respect for nature that these people don't have. And your mind just, it really can't be emphasized enough. Your mind must be so overwhelmed by narcissism. You must have succumbed to it to such a hopeless degree if you could walk out into nature and rather than being awestruck by its beauty, instead start thinking about all of the things that you're entitled to. Like, it shouldn't even be possible to have that kind of, if you're looking out over a mountain range or something, if you have a healthy mentality, you should just be caught up in the beauty of it and understanding how small and helpless you are in comparison with this vast, powerful thing. But yeah, you have these liberals that can look at that and all they're thinking about is, I don't feel included. Include me, mountains. It's crazy. I'm always on the lookout for ways to save time in my day, such as mobile ordering my coffee so I can skip the line of sleep-deprived zombies because, let's face it, time is money, and I'd rather spend mine doing something productive or at least entertaining. Now, if you're running a business, you know that being able to work on your own schedule is crucial. But there's one time-sucking task that can throw a wrench in your perfectly planned day: mailing stuff. Whether it's legal documents, checks, or marketing materials, it's a pain in the neck. That's where Stamps.com comes in. And let me tell you, it's a game changer. Stamps.com isn't just for small businesses either, from mom and pop shops to sprawling multi-location organizations. It handles all your mailing and shipping needs. And get this, you can do it all from your computer or phone anytime, day or night. No lines, no traffic, no interacting with other humans. If that's not your thing, it's like having a 24/7 post office at your fingertips, minus the soul-crushing fluorescent lighting. Gets even better between the ability to schedule package pickups and offering discounts up to 89% off USPS and UPS rates. Stamps.com has got your business needs covered. So here's the deal. Free up more time for more important business with Stamps.com. Sign up at Stamps.com and enter code Walsh for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. That's Stamps.com, code Walsh. Today's your final chance to join Daily Wire Plus at 47% off. Use code FIGHT at dailywire.com/subscribe before midnight. Don't miss out on unlimited access to the truth with uncensored daily shows from the most trusted names in conservative media, completely ad-free. This is your last chance to get live breaking news coverage and the hard-hitting investigative journalism the left doesn't want you to see at this incredible discount. Time's running out. Join the fight now before this 47% off deal expires at midnight tonight. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Use code FIGHT for your exclusive discount. That's dailywire.com/subscribe. Code FIGHT for 47% off new Daily Wire Plus memberships. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. We began the show talking about Kamala Harris, and I am loath to end the show also talking about Kamala Harris, but that's the situation we find ourselves in. Except I'm going to do something different this time around, something unprecedented, at least for me. I'm going to defend her. There are many valid reasons to criticize Kamala. She's incompetent, unfit for office, dishonest, morally corrupt, never accomplished anything, and so on. All of that might be true, but I'm all about fairness on this show. And in fairness, I think it must be said that Kamala doesn't get enough credit for her eloquence. In fact, she's accused of being ineloquent, even incoherent most of the time. And I think the people who make such accusations are being, frankly, intentionally obtuse. They can understand what Kamala is saying. They just pretend that they can't. And today I want to talk about a specific example. So this past weekend, Kamala sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes. And during the course of that conversation, she was asked about the situation in the Middle East. Her response has now gone viral on social media for all the wrong reasons. Many people are claiming that in response to the question, she served up a heaping portion of word salad, one so confused and disjointed and unwieldy that it's shocking even by her standards. Now I'm going to play the longer version of this clip so you get the full context. The alleged word salad comes in the last 20 seconds, but here's the whole thing. Listen.
Does the U.S. have no sway over Prime Minister Netanyahu?
The aid that we have given Israel allowed Israel to defend itself against 200 ballistic missiles that were just meant to attack the Israelis and the people of Israel. And when we think about the threat that Hamas, Hezbollah presents, Iran, I think that it is without any question, our imperative to do what we can to allow Israel to defend itself against those kinds of attacks. Now, the work that we do diplomatically with the leadership of Israel is an ongoing pursuit around making clear our principles, which include the need for humanitarian aid, the need for this war to end, the need for a deal to be done, which would release the hostages and create a ceasefire. And we're not going to stop in terms of putting that pressure on Israel and in the region, including Arab leaders.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
So there you go. Everyone's having a good laugh over that. And let's refer to the transcript. She says, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region. So that's about a 40-word sentence, which is rather long by the standards of the English language. No punctuation in that sentence either. But keep something in mind. Some of the greatest writers of American fiction, Cormac McCarthy, for instance, were known for their epically long sentences and sparse use of punctuation. Cormac McCarthy was a brilliant, eloquent, and lyrical writer, which are all adjectives that some people might use to describe Kamala Harris. I've never known anyone who would describe her that way, but some people might. Now, Kamala's critics are pretending that they can't understand what she was trying to say there at the end, but I think they're being really unfair, and I'll prove it. So let's break this down, okay? You weren't expecting this, but this is going to be a full defense, in-depth defense of Kamala Harris, piece by piece. So she begins, the work that we have done. What kind of work? Well, it doesn't matter. The work, some sort of work. And we are doing work, aren't we? Can you deny that we, whoever we are in this context, are doing work? The definition of work is activity involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or result. So we're all doing work of some kind every second of the day, arguably. When you walk down the steps, you're doing work. When you eat lunch, you're doing work. We're always doing work. We're rarely not doing work. And that's the point that Kamala is making here. She continues, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements. Again, her critics will be disingenuous and demand to know what kind of work and what kind of movements. They're getting hung up on technicalities. The fact is that we are doing work, as we just established, and there are movements that are happening. Would you deny that? Would you look at the situation in the Middle East and tell me that things aren't moving? No, you wouldn't. So don't criticize Kamala here. She's 100% right. Things are moving. Movements are moving. Movements are moving, and they're creating more movements, which are also moving, in the end, resulting in additional movements. And that's what Kamala is getting at in, I think, in this next portion of the sentence, where she says, movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or result of many things. Now, this is brilliant and undeniably accurate yet again. The movements were prompted by or a result of. Now, if something is prompted by something else, then it is by definition a result of that thing. So isn't it redundant to use both words? Yes, but it's not untrue. That's the point. Kamala likes to use 2 or 3 words, sometimes 4 words in a row that all mean the same thing. And you can call it redundancy. I like to call it verbal generosity. She's providing us with many words, many more words than we need. And so you could kind of take your pick of the word that you like. And we have a word surplus now. And that's never a bad thing, especially in this economy. Prompted by, she says, or a result of many things. Okay, so these things that happened were themselves a result of many things. What kind of things? Many. Many things. Again, who could deny the truth of this statement? Who could look me in the eye with a straight face and tell me that there are not many things happening in the Middle East, which were all caused by other things that also happened? So, what's the alternative? Are you seriously going to tell me that there aren't many things occurring? All the people that are laughing at this alleged word salad, what are you trying to say? Are you going to claim that there's only one thing happening? Or no things? Don't be ridiculous. You're sitting over there judging Kamala Harris for her alleged lack of coherence, while at the same time, you're pretending that there aren't many things causing many other things to happen at this exact moment. So you're being a hypocrite. You should be ashamed. And now we get to the grand finale of this sentence. It all culminates in this, what I think really is a stunning rhetorical flourish. She says, quote, the result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region. Our advocacy for what needs to happen. What exactly needs to happen? Well, who knows? That's not the point. Don't focus on semantics. The fact is that certain things need to happen, and we're advocating for those things. Would you prefer that we advocate for what doesn't need to happen? Is that what you're saying? So you accuse Kamala of being some kind of babbling, inarticulate midwit, and yet you're the one claiming that we should advocate for what doesn't need to happen, as opposed to Kamala's plan, which is to advocate for what does need to happen? I mean, give me a break. Kamala's point here is very clear. She's saying that we need to engage in advocacy in order to advocate for the things, the many things, that need to be advocated for, and most certainly not for the things that should not be advocated for, which is a remarkable insight. Now think about it. There's so much confusion and disarray in the Middle East. Indeed, in the entire world. Where's all this chaos coming from? Well, it happens because lots of people are doing things that don't need to be done and should not be done. So Kamala is now coming along and saying, hey folks, let's all do the good things rather than the bad things. And then everyone, turns and responds and asks, well, how many good things should we be doing? And Kamala says, many. We should do many of those things. And frankly, few, if not none, of the not good things. So her point is that if we do all the good things that we should do, then that will result in many other things which are also good, and which will themselves result in many other things that have been prompted by the things before them, which they are the results of. You see? You see what she's trying to say here? Now, you may listen to all of this, and you may laugh and sneer. and claim that Kamala is just babbling mindlessly. But if you really listen, if you listen with an open mind, unburdened by what has been, you can perceive the great wisdom in her words. If only we would heed them, we could have peace on earth. And that is why, in a great twist, this time around, it is Kamala's critics who are today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
John Bickley here, Daily Wire Editor-in-Chief. Wake up every morning with our show, Morning Wire, where we bring you all the news that you need to know in 15 minutes or less. Join me and my co-host Georgia Howe for daily coverage of all the biggest stories on Morning Wire.